The random killing in Austin, the mechanic who never came home. CASEVAULT true crime script. On a quiet Monday night in Austin, Texas, a man walked into a parking lot expecting nothing more than an ordinary evening. He was not meeting an enemy. He was not running from danger. He was not involved in any conflict. He was simply there. But within minutes, that ordinary night would become a homicide investigation. A stranger approached. A confrontation began. A gun was fired, and a 28-year-old mechanic named Jose Salgado-Amador would never return home. Police would later describe the attack as a shocking act of violence with no clear connection between the victim and the suspect. A crime that appeared completely random, and that is what made it so disturbing. Because sometimes the most frightening cases are not the ones where people know the danger is coming. They are the ones where there is no warning at all. This is the story of the Austin parking lot shooting, the case of the mechanic who never came home. June 15th, 2026. Southeast Austin. The area around East Riverside Drive was still active that night. Businesses were open. Cars moved through the streets. People were finishing errands and heading home. Near the intersection of East Riverside Drive and Pleasant Valley Road sat a shopping center, a restaurant, a thrift store, an auto zone, a normal place where people came and went every day. Nothing about the location suggested that it would soon become the scene of a murder investigation. But at approximately 10:45 p.m., everything changed. According to investigators, Jose Salgado-Amador was in the parking lot when another person approached him, someone he did not know, someone with no known connection to him. The encounter was sudden, and according to police, the suspect's intention was to rob Jose. At first, investigators believed the situation may have been a simple robbery attempt, but something happened. Jose fought back. He resisted, and that moment turned a robbery into something far worse. A weapon appeared. A shot was fired, and the life of Jose Salgado-Amador was changed forever. The person who attacked him did not stay. The suspect fled, leaving behind a crime scene, a family waiting for answers, and a community trying to understand how something so violent could happen in such an ordinary place. When officers arrived, they found Jose suffering from gunshot injuries. Emergency crews rushed to save him. But despite their efforts, he did not survive. The man who spent his days fixing cars, helping people get back on the road, was now the victim of a murder investigation. A person who repaired broken things had become someone whose own life could not be repaired. For detectives, the first hours were critical. Every homicide begins with questions. Who was the victim? Who was the suspect? Why did it happen? And most importantly, was this planned? Or was this a crime that exploded in a matter of seconds? In Jose's case, investigators quickly discovered something unusual. There was no obvious relationship between the two people. No known history. No evidence of a personal argument. No sign that Jose had been targeted because of who he was. Detectives believed the victim and suspect were strangers. A random encounter. A random attack. A random tragedy. Random crimes create some of the most difficult investigations. When a victim knows their attacker, police often have a starting point. They can look at relationships, conflicts, messages, past problems. But when the attacker is a stranger, the investigation becomes a search through uncertainty. The suspect could be anyone. The reason could be hidden, and the only answers may come from evidence left behind. Investigators immediately began searching for that evidence. They looked at surveillance footage from nearby businesses. They searched for witnesses. They examined every possible movement before and after the shooting. Because in a case like this, seconds matter. A few seconds before the shooting. A few seconds after. A vehicle leaving. A person walking away. A camera recording something nobody noticed at first. The smallest detail could become the biggest breakthrough. Police later released images of the person they believe was responsible. The suspect was described as a young Hispanic male, approximately 15 to 20 years old. At the time he was last seen, he was wearing a gray hoodie. After the shooting, investigators believe he left the area in a light-colored sedan. A simple description, a few details. But behind those details was the identity of a person who had taken a life, and detectives needed to find him. The search for the suspect became the focus of the investigation. A person had entered a parking lot. A person had confronted Jose. A person had pulled the trigger. And then that person disappeared. But investigators knew one thing. People rarely vanish completely. They leave traces. A vehicle. A camera image. A witness memory. A mistake. Every movement creates evidence. Detectives began rebuilding the timeline. What happened before Jose was approached? Where did the suspect come from? Was he already watching the area? Or was this simply an opportunity that appeared? Those questions were critical, because understanding the moments before the shooting could reveal the suspect's intentions. If the attack was planned, there could be a different pattern. If it was spontaneous, investigators would need to understand what caused the sudden escalation. The parking lot itself became a silent witness. Every person who walked through that area that night became important. Someone may have seen a vehicle arrive. Someone may have noticed a person standing nearby. Someone may have heard something unusual before the gunshot. Often in criminal investigations, people remember details they do not realize are important. A strange feeling, a face, a car, a moment that seemed normal at the time. But after a crime happens, those memories can become pieces of the puzzle. The suspect's escape vehicle became one of the most important clues. A light-colored sedan, a vehicle leaving the area after a deadly shooting. Detectives wanted to know who owned that car, who was driving, was anyone else inside, where did it go after leaving the scene. A vehicle can tell a story. It can reveal a path, and sometimes it can lead investigators directly to the person they are searching for. Meanwhile, the community reacted with fear and disbelief, because this was not a crime that happened in a hidden location. It happened in a place people recognized, a place where families shop, where workers finish their shifts, where people expect to feel safe. After the shooting, many residents began asking the same question. Could this have happened to anyone? That question is one of the most disturbing parts of random violence. People want to believe there is always a warning. That danger has a face, that victims can see it coming. But sometimes there is no warning. Sometimes a person is simply in the wrong place during the wrong moment. And that reality is difficult to accept. For Jose's family, the investigation was not just about solving a crime. It was about understanding the loss of someone they loved. A police report can describe what happened. A crime scene can show where it happened. But neither can explain what a person meant to the people around them. Jose was not just a victim. He was a person, a son, a friend, a worker, someone who had plans for the future, someone whose life continued beyond that parking lot. Investigators continued asking the public for help. They wanted anyone with information to come forward, someone who saw something, someone who heard something, someone who had video from the area. Because in cases like this, the person who solves the mystery is often not a detective. Sometimes it is a witness. Sometimes it's a small piece of information that finally connects everything. The Austin Police Department knew time was important. As days passed, memories could change. Evidence could become harder to find. The suspect could move farther away. But detectives continued searching, because every homicide leaves behind unanswered questions. And every unanswered question represents someone who deserves the truth. One of the biggest questions remained. Why Jose? Why him? Why that night? Why that parking lot? The answer could only come from the person responsible. But until that person was identified, investigators had to rely on evidence, not assumptions, not rumors, facts. The case also raised another difficult reality. The suspect was believed to be very young, between 15 and 20 years old. A person who, regardless of what investigators discovered, was still young enough that many would question how someone could make such a violent decision. How does a person reach a moment where another human life becomes meaningless? What happens before that moment? What choices lead someone there? Those questions are bigger than one investigation. But in this case, they were connected to one victim, Jose Salgado-Amador. The night of the shooting lasted only a few minutes, but the consequences would last forever. A family lost someone. A community lost a sense of security. And investigators began a search that would continue until the truth was found. Because every murder leaves behind two stories. The story of the person who caused the harm, and the story of the person who was taken away. Too often, the victim becomes only a headline, a name, a date, a location. But behind every case file is a human being. And Jose's story deserves to be remembered. As the investigation continued, detectives returned again and again to the same pieces of evidence. The parking lot, the surveillance footage, the witness statements, the vehicle, the description of the suspect. Each piece was small, but together they created a picture of the final moments before Jose Salgado-Amador's life ended. In many homicide cases, the truth is hidden behind complicated relationships, a secret, a betrayal, a conflict that has been building for months or years. But this case was different. According to investigators, there was no known connection between Jose and the person who attacked him. No history, no warning, no explanation. Just a stranger meeting a stranger, and one person making a decision that could never be undone. That is what made the case so unsettling. A person can prepare for many dangers. People can avoid places they believe are unsafe. They can stay alert. They can make careful choices. But nobody can predict every moment of violence. Nobody can know when another person will make a destructive choice. And that uncertainty is what stayed with the people of Austin. For detectives, solving the case meant finding the person behind the description. The gray hoodie, the young man, the light-colored sedan. Those details were not just clues. They represented someone, a real person who knew what happened that night, someone who carried the answers. Investigators continued their appeal to the public. They asked people to look carefully, not just at faces, but at memories. Was there a vehicle that looked unusual? Did someone leave an area quickly? Did someone suddenly act differently after that night? Sometimes the smallest observation can break open a case. The search for justice is often a long process. There are no shortcuts, no easy answers. Detectives have to follow every lead, check every piece of evidence, separate facts from assumptions, because an arrest is not the end of the story. The truth has to survive examination. For Jose's loved ones, time moved differently. While investigators worked through evidence, they had to live with the absence, a missing voice, an empty space, a future that would never happen. The hardest part of losing someone unexpectedly is that life does not give people time to prepare. One moment someone is there, the next moment they are gone. Jose's story is a reminder that every victim has a life before the crime. He was not only the man found in a parking lot, he was someone who woke up that day, someone who had plans, someone who had ordinary moments, someone who mattered. The investigation into his death continues to search for the answers that remain. Who was the person responsible? What exactly happened during those final seconds? And why did a normal night become a tragedy? The parking lot where Jose was killed will continue to exist. Cars will park there. People will walk through. Businesses will open and close. Life will continue moving forward. But for one family, that place will always represent the moment everything changed. A quiet Monday night. A simple trip. A stranger approaching. A gunshot. A life taken. A mystery left behind. The case of Jose Salgado-Amador is not only about a crime. It is about how fragile ordinary moments can be. How quickly a normal evening can become a nightmare. And how one decision can create pain that lasts for years. Some cases are remembered because of the person who committed the crime. Others are remembered because of the mystery. But the most important cases are remembered because of the person who was lost. Jose Salgado-Amador was a 28-year-old mechanic. A man who spent his life repairing things. A man who helped others. A man who should have had many more years ahead. But on that night in Austin, his story was interrupted. The investigation continues. The search continues. And the hope remains that one day the final questions will be answered. Because justice is not only about finding who did it. It is about giving a voice back to the person who can no longer speak. This was the story of the Austin random killing. The story of Jose Salgado-Amador. The mechanic who went out one night and never came home. CASEVAULT. Behind every crime scene, and there is a human story. Behind every victim, there is a life that mattered. And behind every unanswered question, there is a truth waiting to be found. But even after the police tape disappears, even after the investigators leave the scene, a question remains. How does a community move on after something so random? Because the hardest part about a case like this is not only the violence itself, it is the uncertainty. The fact that there may never have been a clear reason, the fact that Jose may have simply crossed paths with someone who made a terrible choice. In the days after the shooting, people who lived nearby were forced to think about something they usually try not to consider. That danger does not always announce itself. It does not always come with a warning. Sometimes it appears in a place that feels completely normal. A parking lot, a street, a place visited hundreds of times before. And then, in one moment, everything changes. For investigators, every homicide is a promise to the victim, a promise to the family, a promise that the case will not be forgotten. Detectives do not see only evidence. They see someone who had a future. Someone whose final moments became the center of an investigation. Someone whose story deserves to be completed. The search for the suspect continued. The images, the description, the vehicle, the timeline, all of it pointed toward one goal, identifying the person responsible. But there was another challenge, finding the truth without knowing the full story. Because the suspect was the only person who could explain what happened from his perspective. Why he approached Jose, what he intended, and what happened during those final seconds. Sometimes criminals leave behind evidence because they believe they have escaped. They forget about cameras. They forget about witnesses. They forget that every action creates consequences. A person may leave the scene, but the scene remembers. A camera may record a vehicle. A witness may remember a face. A small detail may connect to another detail. And slowly the story becomes clearer. That is how investigations work. Not through one dramatic moment, but through patience. Through thousands of small pieces coming together. The case of Jose Salgado-Amador also raises a question about choices, not the choice of the victim. Jose was simply living his life. The question is about the choice made by the person who caused the violence. A single moment, a single decision, a moment that created a lifetime of consequences. Because after a crime happens, there are never only two people involved. There is the victim, there is the suspect, but there are also families, friends, witnesses, First responders, investigators, entire communities. One action can spread further than anyone expects. And that is why cases like this stay with people. Not because they are impossible to understand, but because they are too easy to understand. Everyone knows what it feels like to have a normal day. Everyone knows what it feels like to believe tomorrow will come. Jose believed that too, until one night changed everything. The final image of this case is not just a police investigation. It is a reminder that behind every headline is a person, behind every crime scene is a family, and behind every name is a story. Jose Salgado-Amador's story did not begin in that parking lot, and it should not end there. He was more than the victim of a crime. He was a person who worked, a person who cared, a person who had a life. The investigation continues searching for answers. The community continues waiting. And the memory of Jose remains. Because some cases are not remembered because of how they ended. They are remembered because of what was taken. A future, a possibility, a life. This is the case of Jose Salgado-Amador. A quiet night in Austin. A stranger. A decision. And a tragedy that left behind one question that still remains. Who was responsible? CASEVAULT. Some mysteries are solved by evidence. Some are solved by time. But every victim deserves the truth. The investigation into Jose Salgado-Amador's death represents something every homicide detective understands. A case is never only about what happened. It is about everything that happened after. The calls that were made, the doors that were knocked on, the interviews that lasted for hours, the evidence that had to be carefully collected, the moments when investigators had to look at what remained and ask, what story does this tell? A crime scene does not speak with words. It speaks through details. A position of a vehicle, a direction someone traveled, a timeline, a piece of video, a witness who remembers something days later. Every detail becomes part of a larger picture, and detectives spend countless hours trying to rebuild the final moments of a victim's life. For Jose, those final moments happened unexpectedly. There was no planned goodbye, no final conversation, no chance to know what was about to happen. That is one of the cruelest parts of sudden violence. The victim does not know they are living their final moment. They are simply living. A mechanic's hands are usually associated with fixing problems, repairing engines, replacing damaged parts, helping people continue their journeys. But on that night, the person who spent his life fixing things became someone who needed help. And the people who arrived afterward could not change what had already happened. The first responders who arrived at the scene saw something no family should ever have to experience. A person fighting for life, a scene of violence, a moment where every second mattered. They did what they could, but some moments cannot be reversed. As the investigation continued, detectives knew that finding the suspect would require more than searching. It would require understanding where the suspect came from, understanding the path taken after the shooting, understanding how someone could walk away from a moment that ended another person's life. And somewhere, investigators believed someone knew something. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it was someone who saw the vehicle. Maybe it was someone who heard a conversation. Maybe it was someone who had information, but was afraid to speak. But every unsolved case depends on one thing, someone deciding that the truth matters, because silence can protect a person who caused harm. But speaking can help bring answers. A single phone call, a single message, a single piece of information. Sometimes that is all it takes. The city of Austin has seen many investigations, but every case has its own story. This one began with a simple fact. A man went to a parking lot, and he never came home. There are no dramatic movie scenes in real investigations. There is no perfect clue appearing instantly. There is only work, slow, careful, persistent. Detectives following every possibility, looking at every detail, trying to give a family something that every family deserves. The truth. The tragedy of Jose Salgado-Amador is not only the question of who committed the crime. It is also the question of how quickly life can change. A person can have plans for next week, plans for next month, plans for years ahead, and then one moment removes all of them. That is why victims must remain at the center of every story. Not the weapon, not the suspect, not the mystery, the victim. Because before the crime happened, Jose was simply Jose, a man living his life, a man working, a man with people who cared about him. And as the investigation continues, one hope remains, that the person responsible will be identified, that answers will come, that justice will eventually reach the people who are waiting. Until then, the questions remain. Who was the person who approached Jose? What happened in those final seconds? Why did a simple encounter become deadly? And where is the person responsible now? A parking lot can look ordinary. A street can look ordinary. A normal night can look ordinary. But sometimes history changes in places where nobody expects it. The story of Jose Salgado-Amador is a reminder that behind every case file is a human being. Behind every investigation is a family waiting. And behind every unanswered question is a truth that has not yet been uncovered. CASEVAULT. The evidence may tell us what happened, but remembering the victim tells us why it matters. The days after a homicide are often the quietest. The noise disappears. The flashing lights are gone. The investigators are no longer standing in the parking lot. But for the people left behind, the moment never truly ends. Because a crime scene can be cleaned. A street can return to normal. A business can open again. But a family does not.